How do you do, everyone? My name is Rob Raffealli, and I'm the guest host tonight on Worthen One. And I have with me a guest no one expected. Even more than the Spanish Inquisition, no one expected my guest tonight, Jim Worthen. I don't know if you know enough about him, but now you will.
Thank you, Rob. It's great being here.
At your age, it's great being anywhere.
I'm in a different atmosphere sitting over here.
It's like being the passenger in the car for once.
Yeah, and it's we've instructed each other into I'm being treated just as a guest. I can't see the time. I can't, worry about the camera angles or anything. So
that's right. Let the professionals take care of
that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've watched a guy do some interviews on this show, and even done a few myself. So I'm thinking of Tom Watson right now. So, Mr. Worthen, or if I may call you Jim. Jim, when and where were you born? You can leave out the when if you feel like it.
You'll learn when through the history. I was born in Effingham, Illinois, a little town in north central Illinois. If you drew a line from Vincennes, Indiana to St. Joseph, Missouri, and then drew a line from Chicago to Cairo, Illinois, down at the tip of Illinois, they would intersect at Effingham. It was a kind of a...
That's what you told everybody when everybody asked you where you were from, right? You just give them a map and say, here, you just...
Yeah, I usually use my hands.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to draw on a map, you're in there.
And I was not one of the last people, but unusually, I was born at home. Now our home was 3 blocks from Effingham Hospital, and I was my mother's 4th child. And
she got a little blasé?
Yeah, no, it had been 13 years since the last one. I was an only child. My sister was 16, my brother was 13, and my older brother was stillborn. But in those days, he was a real birth.
Yes. That's how they were recorded. In fact, I know in my extended family that my mother was number 2 out of 5, my father was number 7 out of 7, but there were at least a couple stillbirths in either family. Yeah. It was something we don't hear about quite as often now.
We were in Effingham briefly because our family had pioneered Illinois in 1803 and been some of the first white people in Illinois. And there are highways named after my family on the old maps. But the war broke out, and we moved west.
Okay, because of the way you're talking about family and pioneering the town in 1803, I'm not quite sure which war and which generation moved west.
Second World War.
Second World War, okay. So now we're talking about your parents and your siblings.
Yes.
Okay, so no longer in Effingham. We didn't have the interstates yet. So where did they move first, and how did they do that?
They moved first to a place they had been earlier, and that's Hood River, Oregon. And we were only there for about a year. My 16-year older sister had been born in Bend, Oregon, back in the 20s.
Or Bend-Or, as I like to say. Yeah. Hood River is, these days it's a windsurfing mecca. I'm assuming it was not at that time.
No, it was kind of a lumber town, and there was some tourism because of Mount Hood being one of the nearest real ski areas. And so back then, my brother even graduated from Hood River High School. And but back to the Midwest, the reason we had to go west to participate in the war effort was my dad was a veteran of the First World War. My dad was 49 when I was born, my mother 44, rather an afterthought.
More like no thought.
Yeah, thank goodness there was a big abortion movement. They might have tried to twist their arms, but they wouldn't have accepted. My dad was slightly disabled in the First World War through being gassed, and he was a squad platoon sergeant, and he yelled for all of his men to put their masks on, and while he was doing the yelling, he got a
lung vote.
Yeah, and he coughed blood for his whole life, and
was that part of what he died of?
Well,
because he lasted a long time thereafter.
Yeah, when I was young, he was 6'2" and 145 pounds. Now, he had smoked a lot. He smoked 2 packs a day for probably 40 years. And when he came to California, he built Liberty ships, which is asbestos. And he loved crisp bacon and steak. So there's 4 carcinogens, and he died of lung cancer at 74.
Yeah, we might even say that dread killer, natural causes.
Yeah.
It takes so many. But lung cancer, I haven't had it yet. I'm sure it's nasty.
Yeah,
you were with your dad.
My parents were kind of an anomaly. They died younger than most of their family.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, after we moved west, my grandmother joined us from Illinois, and as a young teenager, grandma sat. I would be left home with this 92-year-old woman to make sure she didn't fall or something, and she really, spanned the era of American history. She came to Illinois in a covered wagon in 1862. And my daughter, doing research, found that her family left Tennessee, gave up their one slave, and cut off from the rest of the family. And there's a document that they traveled to Illinois under the protection of General Ulysses S. Grant. So
that's a collectible.
Yeah, but she went from the covered wagon to the jet plane. Mm-hmm. And we think about all the changes in technology and everything. She spanned all that era of changes in our society.
Just to interject a little bit of how I relate to that, my older grandpa was born before 1900, came to the United States as an illiterate 14-year-old in steerage in some boat, and when he returned eventually to visit relatives in Italy, he went in a 747. So he flew across the Atlantic, and of course we'd already had done all our moon landings by then. So it's a good span.
Yeah, quite a change. We came first through Hood River for a year, and then down to the Bay Area, where my dad, as I alluded to, built Liberty ships, and those are the little boats that we built thousands and thousands of, that carried our supplies across the Pacific mainly. But
so those were basically not armed, were they?
No, and they lost many. The Merchant Marine had a lot of casualties.
Yes.
People don't realize how the Merchant Marine in the Second World War was as much in danger as any of our fighting men.
Oh, sure.
And so we lived in San Francisco, and interesting aside is that last April my daughter and I wanted to go back to my family's history in the Bay Area, and so we took 2 days and toured San Francisco and the East Bay, where we moved to and I finished high school. And the shock was that I would describe different things, like where I went to elementary school, where we lived, and my sister met her husband, and and we'd drive, and they were still there. We went to my elementary school. It was still the same. And when we got over to the East Bay, it was basically the same. My junior high school was the same. The high school had been rebuilt, but there was a football field parking lot now behind Sears where I played football. So it was quite an experience.
Yeah, that's the nostalgia made real as you see. It's not just I remember it, and there it is.
Yeah, I was 3 years old when we moved into San Francisco, and we moved upstairs above in a one-bedroom apartment, my mother and I, and a two-bedroom apartment, mother and I and father and my sister. By that time, my brother was off trying to get into the war. He ended up in the Merchant Marine, as a matter of fact, because they wouldn't sign for him at 16 to get into the war.
Right.
And he could join the Merchant Marine without being in the military. And we were upstairs, and downstairs was a laundry. You know, old-fashioned, take your suits and have them fixed. I guess there's still some of those. And she started flirting with the young man whose family owned the laundry downstairs. And the story was...
That's, your sister did?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the story was that at about 6 o'clock each night, I would have to go to the top of the stairs and yell, "Patty, come home!" At, 3 or 4 years old. And they ended up marrying and being married for over 40 years.
Right. Yeah, I don't know too much about your older siblings because, well, we didn't meet.
Pardon me?
I said we didn't meet. I never met
No,
your
no.
older siblings, but I've heard you speak of them, and I know that there was...
My brother lived a tough, tragic life. He did finally, and there's even a picture of his graduation at Fort Ord, he did finally in 1945 got to join the Army, 2nd Division, and he was shipped off to Japan in the occupation forces. And he developed an allergy that caused his tongue to swell up and almost threatened his life because he couldn't breathe. And they determined that it had something to do with the dyes in the uniforms over there. It hadn't happened when he was here. And so he got a medical discharge. But in that time, they treated him with what we call barbiturates, and his were reds because they would depress
Things
his...
like phenobarbital, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and so he was addicted to that his whole life and died at about 56 years old. My sister lived to be 82.
Yeah, I think spoke years ago of visiting with your sister.
Yeah, she retired. She and her husband Frank retired to Fresno, and they did volunteer work, and she became Patty at the front desk of the city hall, where she would tell, you go there for the mayor's office, you go there for the clerk, you go there, and they gave her an award even, and she loved it. In San Francisco,
let's get to so you moved with your dad down to San Francisco. You were in the 2-bedroom place above the laundry.
3 years old. I'm 4 years old.
Okay, so it's still during the war.
Yeah, and after the war, we had the opportunity. My brother-in-law and my sister and my mother and dad bought a house up on just below Mount Davison, up above the city, and it was the last remnant of the Christopher Dairy, and Christopher Milk and everything was big in Santa Barbara, and in fact, Christopher became mayor of Santa Barbara.
Are you talking about San Francisco instead?
Yeah, San Francisco.
Okay, great.
And so I was able to run wild in what was about a 70-acre grassland on dirt road in the middle of San Francisco. And there was only 3 other houses on this 70 acres, and it was, I've described my parents'
You said their style was sort of free range.
yeah,
as far as
like I was a free range animal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and that wasn't uncommon in those days. You go play, have a problem, come back, and of course no cell phones, very few pay phones or anything.
They didn't expect to see you till dinner.
Yeah, but you'll be back at this time. And I remember a vivid picture when I was about in kindergarten, and I was coming home, and I began playing and digging and everything, and my dad had been injured, and he was at home. Mm-hmm. And I'm there, and all of a sudden I look up, and here's this, to me, giant man, 6 foot tall, in a fedora hat and his suit. You were supposed to be home a half an hour ago. They didn't say grounded. You get home and stay in your room, you know. Mm. So
this man was your father?
Huh?
This man was your father?
Yes. And but we, as I say, we were kind of free-range animals. I remember getting a group of guys together because we loved the Three Musketeer, mm-hmm. and it was in those days 3 little. You could separate them.
Okay, I thought you meant you become fans of the movie.
No.
Okay, yeah. So really, they broke 3 ways.
Yeah.
Nice.
So we would go down to the nearest little track, and where there was a store, and we would. It was before refrigerators. Back then, probably a tenth of the people had refrigerators. It was growing fastly after the war, but there was nothing like that built from 1940 to 1945, mm-hmm. Just like there were no cars built. And so we would go down there, and there were kids who would, when the Iceman carried blocks of ice in for mm-hmm. the ice boxes, the term ice box was true.
Right, it was an ice box.
And most families had an ice box. And the kids would steal from his truck. So the 3 of us would hang around and start yelling at him and calling him and threatening to fight with him for stealing his ice cream. And he would give us, I think it was 10 cents or something to buy a Three Musketeer. That was our reward for being the bodyguards for the.
Nice.
Yeah.
I don't really know where the ice came from here. There was probably actually refrigeration houses, but early ice boxes back east. There were some lakes that had most magnificent winter ice, and people literally went out and sawed it and
harvested, yeah,
right, and shipped it to what were called, ice houses, and so it was being used, shipped out in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, this was a bridge after the Second World War into our first boom and kind of mini industrial revolution. Mm-hmm. The guys came home. They could go to the
GI Bill.
GI Bill. They could go to college, and they could get help buying houses. And Levittown and other tracts around the country built houses especially to fit the new families of the veterans. Mm-hmm.
Really, the middle class exploded then.
Yeah. In San Francisco. We were there for all of my elementary school time except the last 6 months. And one of the other places, by the way, the house on Mangles Avenue mm-hmm. now has condos all around where that 75 acres was. And we went there, and there it was, exactly as I remembered it. I could walk up the steps and see where I had lived upstairs, and the downstairs we didn't bother. In fact, nobody was there except it was a business out, contractors' offices, and downstairs was another apartment where my uncle and aunt and their 4 daughters had lived after the war. And it was, as I say, it was interesting that some of these things were like frozen in time.
There's something, I don't know where this would fit into, but I'm going to just ask you about it and see if it's time to speak of it. You've mentioned fondly several times an uncle who had a music shop, and I wonder if does that fit into this, or is that coming in a while?
Yeah, that's good, and I had forgot how to fit it in, but let me just finish the school there. I went to West Portal Elementary School. Now, West Portal was West Portal because the municipal transit went underneath the hills from what's Castro District in San Francisco now, but the East Portal, and came out at West Portal. Well, our elementary school sat right on top of that tunnel.
I've actually seen that long enough ago that I can't quite remember when. 1966, I think.
Yeah, it was there. Everything was the same. There were some temporary classrooms where we'd played handball, but it was all the same. I went down to the West Portal Business District, ate there, and I could remember walking around there and shopping and being picked up there by my mother. So it's just an amazing experience. My aunt, Auntie Mame, we called her. She was my mother's sister, and she married 7 times. Now, she married the same man 3 times. They'd get a divorce, they'd get remarried, they'd get a divorce, they'd remarry. But finally in...
6-time loser.
Yeah. And she also at 17 was married in a dual wedding ceremony with my mom and dad in 1917. So the lady was Auntie Mame. And Aunt Marion had met a man, and he was a music instructor. I don't know exactly how they met, but he had a music studio where he taught kids on the peninsula. And he had a music store called Geld Musics, and it was, if you, back in the old days, drive down Highway 1, or 101, but it wasn't the freeway yet, and that hadn't been built, and he'd had a guitar out over the sidewalk at least, so almost protruding into the street up, 30 feet up on the building near Sequoia High School. And he bought and sold instruments, bought new ones. He at one time had 400 students in Redwood City, Palo Alto, San Mateo, and we'd have to go to his concerts whenever they did concerts of graduation. We had to go be part of the audience. And Uncle Sidney was a wonderful, wonderful man. I shouldn't tell this story, but it's kind of fun. We'd go over there, and they had money and we didn't, and we were building a house in Hayward by then, and Mom said, "Now, Uncle Sidney's Jewish, so please be careful. Don't you see these things and you hear these things even now in the early 50s about the Holocaust and everything." She says, "Just avoid the subject." So we're sitting there, and they had a TV by then, and we're sitting there, and Uncle Sidney's going through the newspaper, and he said, "Oh, Fender, I can get by that. They're asking $250. I probably can sell it for $3 or $350. I'll Jew them down." And "Uncle Sidney, you can't say that. You can't use that derogatory term." He says, "Derogatory?" I said, "Well, you're Jewish." She says, "No, I'm Episcopalian." So there was ethnicity and religion, and he had it separated.
Right. And I'd actually even heard the expression, of course, as a naive kid who didn't know, I didn't even know what kind of derogatory terms people were throwing around. And when someone was trying to get somebody down to a lower price, I actually heard in my head CHEW, as in I'll chew him down.
Yeah.
So later when somebody used the other term clearly, I thought,
Well,
what are you, some kind of an anti-Semite? What's going on? Because I had the other term in head.
yeah, the same thing with the N-word today. And in fact, until 10 years ago, I used the full N-word all the time with my black friends, and it was not a pejorative, it was a friendly greeting. And just like
today, if you want to do that, you better be Dave Chappelle.
Oh, finally, my son in his late 20s said, "You got to quit doing that, Dad." I said, "Why?" I've never had a black person get mad at me. And he said, "But the other people who hear you don't understand that." So I quit using it. But
and by the way, he ignored me. I told him the same thing, but at least he listened to his son.
yeah. You talking about warning me? A lot of people did.
Warning? No,
a lot of things.
I tried to make my most constructive suggestions.
Okay, we were in San Francisco, as I recall.
Yeah, but you were saying that your dad was building a house across the bay.
Yeah, we found a little acre. I bet he paid $5,000 for it, out above Hayward, California, went up over the paved highway and around the back of the mountains, but then it was on a dirt road, and they had subdivided into acreages. He bought one, and we moved to Hayward. I did my last 6 months of elementary school there, and met my best friend in life by hitting him with a baseball bat. My best friend in life up till I moved to Santa Barbara, and I got called in, but he was the catcher, and I was at bat, and I swung back and knocked him down, and when my mother came to pick me up, the principal called it in. She said, "Now, his mother's pretty tough, and so let me just say, let sleeping dogs lie. Don't try to even apologize." And Richard Miner and I became very close friends. We had 7 fights, and I beat him up every time. And he'd do dumb things like, "You son of a bitch." Well, in those days, that meant something, and my mother isn't. And of course, I had another friend, Joe Buck, who we'd get in fights, and he beat me up 4 times. So I wasn't a bully. I fought, and that was starting really in junior high school in Hayward, where I went to a junior high school is still there. It's called Bret Hart Junior High School, after the famous Western author. And walked in there the other day, and I could even point to the classrooms I was in. And so I remember we'd get in fights. I remember one guy calling me out, and we said, "Okay, we'll meet across the street down from the church at the little store." And so there was a big Catholic church, and so we went over there, and we got down, and I learned the greatest lesson about fighting. I started to take my coat off, and he cold cocked me, knocked me right to the ground. The only time I've been even close to being unconscious in all my craziness, breaking windshields with my head, all sorts of things, football, breaking my nose with an elbow. I saw stars as I went down, and I hit my head, and then I got up and beat him up. And but I was going out from his punch, and so
There's a valuable lesson there, you know.
Yeah.
Your brain is not really designed to be bounced off the inside of your skull.
Oh, mine may be. I don't know. It happened so many times.
Sometimes not only doesn't it kill you, but it also doesn't make you stronger.
Yeah, so we built a house there. Uncle Sidney would come over and help, and I was a hod carrier. You know what a hod carrier is?
I am assuming that's the pack of bricks is the hod. It's kind of V-shaped like that in the bricks.
That, and when the cement machine has made the cement, you get the cement to the guys who are filling the bricks in.
Okay, so you also
One
bring
time,
the cement or the mortar up.
after we built the house, a building inspector told my dad that you could hit it with an atom bomb and that fireplace would still be standing there. They built a beautiful fireplace. And so I was in high school, and I had mixed feelings about, I first of all had a girlfriend or two, but I liked sports, and I knew I was going to be going to Westmont sometime. Not Westmont, the Army Academy.
Oh, you thought you were going to go to West Point?
West Point sometime. And so I joined the California Cadet Corps, which was the ROTC in that area. They were the Cadet Corps of the National Guard. Okay. And I went out for football. So I was doing both and had great experiences in both. A guy who was seeing the same girl as I, and he was a squad sergeant. He kept making me do duck walks. A duck walk is walking like a duck with your rifle over your shoulder, and you're in a crouch position walking. And so one day he made the mistake during inspection to grab for my rifle without the proper procedure. I'm holding it, and he reaches for it, and I knocked him down with the butt of the rifle, because you have to do. Nobody can take your rifle without certain procedure. Okay. And so I became more and more known as a fighter.
Right.
They would be
worked for Grant.
Yeah, you know, give me a problem and we'll settle it like men. One time I was playing volleyball out on the asphalt, where we had volleyball courts, and I had a class upstairs in the next building, and a guy came running through the court just about 3 or 4 minutes before the bell was going to ring, and he hit me, and I went down. And
so he hit you deliberately?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I went down and
paid assassin.
I got up and went to the bathroom and got the blood off my lip, and I went upstairs, and he was in that class in the back row. And I went in, I walked right to the back of the class, and I hit him. He went down, I picked him up and hit him, and he went down. I picked him up, and the teacher had got behind him, and the kid went down, and I knocked the teacher down. I was suspended for 2 weeks until the whole story came out, and they reduced it to 3 days, which I'd already served. That teacher was
time served.
That teacher was a reserve captain in the Coast Guard, and I mean captain. He was up there. Yeah. And that was his last year of teaching in our school. I gave him a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, these kids are getting tougher.
But a friend of mine, Tony Andrade, which you met,
sure, I met Tony several times.
Because we stayed in touch through 50 years almost until he passed away, and he would come down, he would bring his yearbook. I didn't have a yearbook. He would get me to go to class reunions. No, I wouldn't go. Finally, he got me to go to one. I got there. It was over in Walnut Creek for Hayward High, and I went to the table. I saw names and everything, and I went back to the lady and said, "This is our 40th reunion." I went back and I said, "My name's not there." She said, "It better not be. That's a memorial. That's for those who have passed away."
Yeah, and, I went to one of mine recently. Yes, we always have a memorial table.
Yeah, and so Tony was drinking and having fun with us, and he said, "Your dad was always a fighter." He said, every Thursday, it would go around the school. Worth was having a fight on the other side of the bridge, because there was a creek going along Hayward High, and there was a bridge, and when you got on the other side, you weren't on school grounds anymore.
Right, so now
and he said, and then there'd be a crowd of 20 or 30 people, and they'd have a fist fight. And Jim didn't always win. And that was, I figured one time that I must have had 70, 80 fights in my high school, and I probably won 45 or so. I wasn't a bully. I just was a fighter. I wouldn't pick on somebody who couldn't stand up for themselves.
Yeah, you keep reminding me of what Lincoln said about Grant when people were trying to get rid of him. He said, "He's indispensable. He fights." And that's right. When you need a fighter, you're glad you have one.
When it came time to finish high school, we had the biggest graduating class in California. You know, they talk about schools today. Well, our school was over 4,000. Our graduating class was almost 800.
So it's like a small town.
Yeah, well, it was beginning to grow. Castro Valley was being built, and in fact, in our sophomore year, we split Castro Valley and Hayward High. The nearest other was San Lorenzo, and they split with San Leandro, so we had new schools. Mm-hmm. When I played football, I was injured playing football, and we played over at San Leandro against Castro Valley, because they didn't have a home stadium yet, and they do it over at San Leandro.
Yeah, I've got a question about your high school here. I know you were in ROTC or something like it. I know you were on the football team. I know you were fighting. Was there any field of study that especially appealed to you? What is it that sent you in the direction that you went? Well, because after all, you attended university.
We can go back to my political career probably soon, but I like history. I took one semester of German. I took one semester of Spanish. I was a low C student, so West Point disappeared real quick. Mm-hmm. And so...
do they require higher grades?
Yeah, sort of, and better political correction than I had. And so I I decided that some of my friends and I were going to go to Oakland City College. That was the nearest city college. It's Merritt now, and it was just blocks from UC Berkeley, and it was a feeder to the university, as they are today, a feeder to the university. And I thought, well, I'll go there, and I'll then straighten my head out and start getting better grades. And I did. I got low Bs, and in my 2 semesters at Oakland City College. And again, history, political science, the social science. I took the required in high school and junior college, the required science courses, chemistry and math, but I don't even know what trigonometry is. Unlike you, I didn't do very well with calculus. I know x equals something, and I know it means something, and I know that subconsciously that it helps me in my thought processes in finding a result. But it just, again, C's and D's on those courses. I got in trouble in a freshman poli-sci course at Oakland because we traveled from Hayward to Oakland, 8 o'clock class. Friend had a convertible, and we went together. And I'd get there in the front row, sit down, wrap my coat around me, and go to sleep.
I fell asleep in a class.
And this, there were 300 or 400 students in this class, and the professor finally called me aside And he said, "You're not going to be able to pass this course if you don't listen to my lectures." I said, "I've read the book. Not to demean you, but I know everything you're teaching, and I'll pass it." And I got a B+.
Okay.
Sleeping through his classes.
Well, of course, the class that I fell asleep in, there were 6 students. So we were all in the front row, and it didn't look good. It was late on a Monday, and I'm afraid that a hard partying weekend didn't really work out with that. But anyway, I'm glad that you were able to, you passed. I passed mine, although it was a good hint to not take a class I'm falling asleep in.
I tease about this. I was addicted to pinball machines, and so every break I would run over there, and that's why I still got C's and B's, and in fact it was a diner with pinball machines that probably was 70% black students or black in the neighborhood, and great camaraderie. In fact, they gave me a nickname, Swivel Hips, because I'd be swiveling around with the pinball machine. And so I didn't do as well in that as I had no focus.
And you hadn't figured out how to monetize pinball yet.
Yeah, and I hadn't figured out what you have to do to get grades. You don't have to be smart. You have to study. And
I've heard of that.
Yeah.
I am smart. Studying has always helped.
Yeah. I hated a friend of mine who just barely studied, but he did his homework and got straight A's. Mm-hmm. He still had fun and everything, but no problem getting, because he had the focus. I had another, in that era, a football player that I played with, Jerry Lundgren. He got straight A's and went to Cal, and as a freshman played in the last Rose Bowl team in 1958 for Cal Berkeley. And they say that he broke down one time in class when he got his B grade. Wow. At Berkeley,
he had expectations.
Yeah.
So this, by the way, just for setting, this was all mid to late 1950s that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Here in high school.
I went into high school and started playing football in '53, and in those days you finish your school one way or the other, hopefully before you were 18. And I graduated at 17, and then went on to junior college.
And that was Oakland Junior College?
Yeah.
You said it was Oakland. Yeah. Okay, good.
And I was planning to go to Berkeley, and in fact hung out at some of the frat houses, and again.
I hope you didn't drink.
No, I didn't. My sex life and drinking started in after I was finished with high school and junior high school.
And junior college.
Probably should go back and
what's going on here?
Take care of politics and religion, because they both have been the real stream of my life.
Okay, well, which one are you going to start with?
Let's start with religion. One of my earliest memories is going to the old First Presbyterian Church in downtown San Francisco, near, I'm sure, where we lived above the laundry, and I can remember little suit and going there, and I had to be again 3 or 4 years old. When we moved up onto Mount Davidson, there was no Presbyterian church close by, my dad had been raised originally as a hard rock Baptist, no drinking, and Christ didn't drink grape juice. That's my mother had been raised in off and on in the Presbyterian Church, but we leaned toward Calvinism and Presbyterian Church. Up on where we lived, up on Mangles Avenue, their church was about a half a mile away and it was a Mariloma Community Church, and it turned out that it was American Reformed Church of America, like the Dutch Reform. And
my mom was Dutch Reformed.
Yeah, very, very Calvinistic and Presbyterian in form. The congregations by and large run their church, and there's no bishop that orders them. If there's a hierarchy, it's hierarchy of democratically the churches. And so we went there and became very close to the pastor and his family, and it was a wonderful time. Probably one of the first that I would say I clearly think is a miracle in my life. My dad was in construction after the war. In fact, he was knocked down an elevator shaft in San Francisco, building a four-story building, and he was knocked. The guys carrying some lumber turned, and he was next to the elevator shaft,
and it's empty,
and it hit him, and he went down, tearing boards down as he went down. They say when they got down there, and there was timbers laying across his chest and everything, and they thought for sure he was dead. He, get off that board! He hit one of them laying across him. He did break some ribs and separated a shoulder and was on disability for about 6 months. Well, forward to Miramonte Church, they were expanding and they were building, and he was part of the construction crew. Volunteers in the off time and contractors in the... And one time in about the third grade, fourth grade, I was going to youth group. Mm-hmm. And I get off the bus and there's ambulances. And what's this about? And I walk, and in April, I walked that scene again and almost broke up. I walked to the alleyway between that church and the apartment building, and there my dad's laying, his head in the pastor's wife's lap, blood all over the place. That's why the ambulances were there. I ran into the church, into the boys' room, got on my knees and just started praying, because a beam had fallen, one of these 10 by 6 beams for the top of a church, and hit him in the head.
Ooh. Yeah.
Well, it hit and sliced his scalp. Didn't hit his skull. It knocked him down. And of course, if you know anything about physiology, your face bleeds like crazy.
Face wounds bleed ferociously.
And so there was blood all over the place. But the miracle of him not getting hit and killed is just always stuck with me.
Fun fact about face wounds. I don't know if they still do it, but hospitals, certainly when I was in college, would carry an aerosol spray of cocaine, because cocaine is a potent vasoconstrictant. So I happen to know someone who was, she was a competitive bicyclist, and she had an accident, and her nose was put back together just fine, but it was just gushing, and it just came along with the cocaine spray, And she said, aside from the fact that she got high, that it stops. So it's for the right use, it's a miracle drug. But sorry to take you away from your father's.
To follow my
Yeah.
religious history, when we moved over to Hayward, we went to join the Presbyterian Church there, and this was an era, 1950, and if you know anything about history, it doesn't even have to be religious history. India, then China, then Korea expelled all the missionaries. And the missionaries were mainly in that part of the world were Presbyterian. And so all of a sudden in 1948 through 52, 3,000 Presbyterian ministers and family came to the West Coast, and the blessing was that's when the West was all booming and needed more ministers.
Right.
So when we moved to Hayward, we small Presbyterian church, and the pastor was Paul Rhodes, and he had a son my age, Jimmy, and we became fast friends. And never fought with Jimmy. I wouldn't do that. But then we built a church there, and it's still there. Visited it, and it was up on the borderline between Hayward and Castro Valley, and so I would go there, and if I couldn't get a ride, I would go take a 2.5-mile walk home and hitchhike. We hitchhiked in those days, and
even I hitchhiked. Yes.
And so I felt very comfortable in that atmosphere in that church. We had a great youth group, and I graduated from high school. As I said, I was going to Oakland City College, and there were Youth for Christ and different youth groups in high schools. And one night I went to late to a Youth for Christ meeting, and this beautiful girl comes out, and she was getting ready to leave, and she went to Castro Valley High, and her name was Catherine, which really Kitty was her nickname. And we began dating. In fact, she gave up a scholarship to Baylor University to enter Oakland City College with me. That kind of caused problems with her family.
Yeah.
And they went to a interdenominational church called Redwood Chapel up on Redwood Road in Castro Valley. And of course, I was active at First Pres, and we were just determined. And so in those days, we were virgins. So if we were going to have sex, we had to get married. And very frustrating.
I was going to say, most people would like to have sex, especially by the time they're
And so
that age.
They decided that if she wasn't going to go to Baylor, they knew the perfect place for her to go, this little religious school in Santa Barbara, Westmont. And so they sent her to Westmont. And we talked to our ministers, and my minister and their minister agreed on one thing. I wasn't ready for marriage. Kitty might be, but I wasn't ready for marriage. And so she came down here, and every Friday I would leave late at night after working at a shoe store, come down here. We'd do things on Saturday. There was no dances, and you couldn't go to the movies. Westmont, you couldn't dance or go to the movies. Although we would run into other Westmont kids when we snuck into a movie. We didn't sneak into the movie. We went to the movie sneaking about what Westmont wanted.
Right.
And I would sleep in my car and drive back on Sunday night.
By the way, we only have about 3 minutes, so we'll think about how much we want to cover here.
Wow. Well,
Because I know that we haven't really gotten into your entry into politics, but here you are getting together with Kitty here in Santa Barbara.
Well, in part one, we'll get into the part two, we'll get into politics.
Okay.
But Kitty and I were determined, and we were in love, and we got married that August in the Hayward Presbyterian Church. Remember, she came down here between semesters on Washington's birthday. I brought her down. 6 weeks, I kept following her. And my sainted brother would say, now, don't have her in your apartment. You can't do that. Don't have her in your apartment. Somebody might be mad enough to have you arrested for having a young woman in your apartment. Those were the bad old days.
Yes, and when people were nosy enough to butt into your business.
So
and the whole country was like New Jersey was when I was a kid.
Yeah.
People feel free to mind your business.
Yeah. So we were married that August, and we became very active in the Santa Barbara Presbyterian Church, and
okay. So at this point, are you 22?
No, at this point, I had to have my mother sign so I could get a marriage license.
So
I was 19.
19.
And people can't believe that a man couldn't marry without his mother's permission or family signature at 21 till 21. A girl could at 18. Right. So my mother had to go to the courthouse with me and sign for me to get a marriage license.
Understood. By the way, we're at about a minute, and you've spoken before, a couple of times now about ages. Well, as it turns out, my father lied about his age to join the military, and was found out and thrown out. And next time he tried to get in, he brought his mother and got a signature, because he was still not full majority, but he could at least be signed in.
I was walking precincts, I was getting married, and in those days you had to be 21 to do it legally. I didn't get to vote till I was 21, and I'd worked in the Young Republicans of the Republican County for years. So maybe on the next one we'll talk about some politics and what happened from
and how you got
coming
into
to
that.
Hayward.
And I know that you met some
truly interesting to Santa Barbara.
You met some truly interesting personalities and worked with them. So I'll be interested to get more of your story on that. There's one of them now.
Yeah.
And of course your mentor,
Bob Lagomarsino. I had the pleasure.
You and I were both in town, but in different age cohorts. So I actually had a conversation with Bob Lagomarsino in 1969.
Wonderful friend and mentor.